So welcome everyone. I'm John Hancock. I'm the convener for the Smart Grid Forum. And just want to welcome you here. I'll get Becky, who's one of Malcolm's former students and now a demigod of the academic world in New Zealand, to do a proper introduction of him. But I did just want to acknowledge some of the people who've made today possible. So Malcolm's in New Zealand for about 3 weeks, and he's doing a lot of work with the Green Grid program, which Becky and Janet are both part of. And he's been working down at the University of Otago for the last couple of weeks, but he agreed to come up to Wellington to run some closed seminars that we're running all week, but also to do this public lecture. So very grateful to the Green Grid team for making that possible. But also very grateful to Victoria. It's lovely to be back in this lecture theatre. All the old crusties in this room will remember this is where all of the ISCR seminars used to happen when Lou was running it. I haven't actually been in here for about 5 years, and it's absolutely identical to when it was. Rather annoyingly, we can't get into Rutherford House. They're still working on it. But it's very nice of Vic to sort of host us here. But we should also acknowledge the Electricity Networks Association and MB, who fund the Smart Grid Forum, and MB actually who also fund the Green Grid program. So big ups to the guys over at the back of the room over there. So that's all good. So I'll stop talking, but I'll give Becky an opportunity just to introduce Malcolm, and then we can hear all about the Internet of Energy. One thing I will say, though, is we are recording this, and this will be going on YouTube. So feel free to ask questions, but make sure they're really smart, because they'll be on the internet forever. Just saying.
Thank you, John. Fantastic. Well, it's an absolute delight to be able to introduce Malcolm. And as I was trying to work out what to say, I thought, well, what can I say about Malcolm? So one of the things that I'm sure many of you know, thanks to Google, is that Malcolm's head of the Energy and Power Group at Oxford University, where he's got a fantastic team researching on multiple different aspects of the energy system, both within the UK and internationally. As John mentioned, Malcolm's been working with us on the Green Grid project for the last 3 years as a collaborator, and we're absolutely delighted to get all his wealth of knowledge from what's going on in the UK. But it's particularly fun for me to get to introduce Malcolm, because we've been working together for over 10 years now, when I started my PhD at Oxford. And at the time, Malcolm was just shifting into the energy space from a background in superconductivity and electric machines. And so rather than start with a narrow focus on one particular thing in energy, Malcolm went for the whole spectrum. He had 3 projects. One on renewable energy generation, looking at tidal turbines. One looking at household energy demand. And the third, looking at developing electric motors with Morgan for a new vehicle. And so it was quite an exciting time, lots of interesting stuff going on. And since completing my PhD, it's been really fun watching Malcolm's group grow and grow and grow since that time. Of 3 students, I think you've now got over 10 students on the go at one time. And their topics have broadened. They're now looking at mobility systems very broadly, new types of energy systems for developing countries, smart grid technologies. And if this one wasn't enough, he's also commercialized all 3 projects that were going on when I started there, plus another 3 since then. And what's been most exciting for me, I think, in the last few years is seeing how these different projects have started to come together and realizing that they're not 3 different projects or 4 different projects, but they're all different aspects of a very exciting and interesting energy future. And we're going to hear about some of that tonight in the Internet of Energy. So, what can I say about Malcolm? He's enthusiastic, a rampant entrepreneur, as John coined earlier in the week, very much a forward thinker, and a true inspiration to anybody that's lucky enough to work with him. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Malcolm.
Thanks, Becky. Right, just to elaborate, first of all, can I just quickly check, have a look at your card. How many of you are hearts? If you're a heart, diamond, spade, face card, in other words, a jack, queen, or king, and a joker. Ah, okay. Some of the jokers need to come sit in the front, please. So all those who've got a joker, you need to come sit in the front because you've got a special role later on. Can I give them a hand? Come on, let's give them all a hand. Okay, as you can expect, I am going to be fairly interactive in the way I do my presentations. And so the bad news for you is that you can't sit back and go to sleep because I'm going to be interacting with you quite a lot. The first one that I'm going to kick, and also what's going to happen is the first probably 2/3 of the talk is going to be PowerPoint heavy. I apologize for that, but it's kind of useful just to show some interesting facts and data. The second third of the presentation is going to be almost PowerPoint zero, and we're going to be having some fun and doing some experiments. The challenge that I have with this one is I've never done this before, so you guys are going to have to bear with me. Okay, I had organized to get a whole lot of torches like this, as John has said, and as we know, we've been let down. So can we just check, because I'm going to need them later on, can you get your torch ready? Turn it on, get your app ready. Can you turn it on and see whether you can see what it looks like? Okay, we're going to need some quite bright ones. Great. Okay, let's see what happens. All right. Okay, let's get on with the lecture. So the first question I have is, this slide is a very important slide to New Zealand. Okay? Talk to the person next to you and say, why is it important to New Zealand? Go. You got 20 seconds. Off you go. Talk to the person next to you. Say hello to them and say, why is that important? Right, so this place is a place called Reefton. Exactly. And the important thing about Reefton is that's the first place where the very first hydro plant started. Okay, so it's the very first hydro plant. It's quite an interesting story. We had a guy called William Pierce who was a bit of a fly-by-night supposed electrical engineer, but not really. And he came along and he had a little generator, which is a 1 kilowatt generator, and he basically got this going in the local brewery. Got a few of the hotels lighting up, and they then said, hey, this is a great thing. And they got some money together, and the whole community put together some quite a bit of money, and they bought their first 20 kilowatt generator, and they created a run-of-river generator. And this is a powerhouse that's taken from about the time of that was 1888. This is taken about 20 years later in 1904. And by this stage, they had upgraded from that original 20 kilowatt generator to 47 kilowatts. And that basically kick-started the hydro industry within New Zealand. So that kind of tells you a very interesting thing about New Zealand, is that hydro has been a part of its energy story right from the beginning. And there's got real strengths with that. Water has also been kind of an interesting part of my story, but for a rather different reason. That's my son from a couple of years ago. And that's not a river he's in, that's my road to my house. Okay, so you can kind of see that we were having some difficulties. We live in a plain, I come from Oxford, and I live very close to the River Thames, and we live in a floodplain, but it's a 1 in 50 year floodplain. Since 2002, it's flooded 7 times. Things are changing. And so that's kind of was part of the drive for me to move away from the area of superconductivity and to start to look at the whole area of sustainability. And so what I want to do is start from there and then move on to where where the fun and exciting stuff that this strong driver is leading us to. So here's question number 2. What is sustainability? Talk to the person next to you and say, what do you think that means by sustainability? It's a nice, easy word. Go for it. I'll give you 30 seconds. Go. Right, so sustainability. For me, the way I think about it, it's about capital. And how do you maintain your capital and how do you grow your capital? And normally we think about it, some of us are getting older, like myself, and we're starting to think about retirement. And so you're thinking about what capital can you start to accrue so that you can live off that in one's old age. But actually capital is not just about money. It's about, first and foremost, it's about people. It's about growing the capital, the human capital that we have, in ensuring that we can not only live exciting and productive lives, but that you can also live that life to meet the requirements that we have and to excel in what we do. The second one is about growing capital about the planet that we live on. The challenge that we have is we only got one of those. Elon Musk, as some of you may know, all you know who Elon Musk is? Tesla, yeah? He is thinking that we've got a second planet, and that's Mars. And SpaceX, as you know, that is his whole endeavor in space is all about saying, can we colonize a second planet? Because he thinks this one's not big enough and we're going to mess this one up. I am hoping that actually we're not going to mess this up, that actually we're going to look forward to it and look after this planet and change the ways that we're doing things. I did a lecture earlier on this, late last week, and it was all about saying, why am I now an optimist? And 3 or 4 years ago, I was a real pessimist because I thought this is the one piece that we're going to mess up. I'm going to start to show you why I think actually we can turn that around and do something exciting, and at the same time, not only make sure that the lives of people are better, that the planet is better, but also that prosperity actually grows, so that we can actually start to increase not only our human capital, our planetary capital, but also our prosperity. So when we're looking at this, it's always worthwhile looking back and to say, okay, how are we doing on these? And the two hard ones is to look at how are we doing as people and as planet. So a nice little graph here that we've got, which basically shows on the horizontal axis what is the ecological footprint for different countries on a per capita basis. So it's basically saying how many global hectares do we need in order to sustain the lifestyle of that particular country. The vertical axis is the Human Development Index, and that's basically an indication of what is the quality of life that those people are having. So, and that measures things such as child mortality, life expectation, educational levels, risk of disease, those kind of key indicators of how well people are doing. The two red lines, the vertical line is basically 2 hectares per person, and that is if you take the total land area which is productive in the planet, and you divide by about 7.3 billion people that you have on the planet, that gives you about 2. Okay, so that's what this will can sustain. The 0.8, the horizontal line, is basically a standard of living which most people aspire to. And therefore, those 2 lines are kind of saying these are the sustainable indicators, those large sustainable indicators that we want to do. Talk to the person next to you and say, what's interesting about this graph? Go. Right, so a couple of interesting things. We tend to have 3 groups of people. We have these guys sitting over here, which are guys who have a very high quality of life, but are using a lot of resources in order to manage that. We have the other group down here, which don't have such a high quality of life, but are not consuming many resources. The third group is we have those group who are in transition, and what you're seeing is that trajectory is going diagonally across. That's the key point. That little square in the top left-hand side is the key area that we should all be aiming for. The kind of thing that bothers me is the total number of countries in that square. And I think that actually the challenge for us in the next, over this coming century, is to basically move these guys from the top right, leftwards. And we've got to move these guys from the bottom here vertically and not diagonally. And to me, this is what Paris is all about in the end of the year, is having that discussion about saying, how do we lift these guys vertically? And how do we, and that might be by leapfrogging the technologies that we were using. And then also to say, how do we actually move leftwards? Quick questions, where's New Zealand? Okay, what I might do is just, I'll go back a slide and remove that. So do you know where New Zealand is? New Zealand's that little red dot about there. Okay, so we're not doing too badly. Okay, but we've got a long way to travel. So sustainability is about saying we want to create value for people and we want to be careful about the planet. And a good way of exploring that is by looking at our electrical system. And that's what I want to do this evening, to say how can we take some of those values where we can start to improve people's perceptions and use of energy, as well as saying can we try and make them a lower impact. Now, I know quite well that, remember I started off with hydro. I know New Zealand has a tremendous amount of hydro. But what I want to do is try and give you a kind of broader perspective as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something. First one, let's see if I can get this right. Do that. Lights, turn those down a little bit. Okay. Right, I'm going to go through my first thought experiment. Imagine it's dark and you turn a light on. Talk to the person next to you about what happens when you turn the light on. I'll give you a minute. Go. Right, so the first time I was asked this question in seriousness was about 6 years ago, and it was done by two people who are very involved in performing arts. And what they were doing is they asked 150 people what happens when I turn a light bulb on. And I was one of the last ones around, and I was asking them, and so what's the type of people's responses? And they're saying that they had a wide range of responses, everything from I'm feeling comfortable, I'm feeling good, to I can read, to I can see my loved ones. How many of you had those types of responses? Good. How many of you are electrical engineers? Right, so I unfortunately did not have those responses. I said, okay, what happens when you turn the lights on? Well, we get some field set up in the system, the element starts to heat up, and I was thinking of a tungsten light, you could think of a CFL. So the interesting thing is that if you look at a good old tungsten light bulb, when it's 100 watts to start off with, the moment you turn it on, the resistance is quite low, it's about a kilowatt to start off with for the first half cycle. It quickly disappears because the resistance changes. And I got boring about that and said eventually, okay, the energy starts to come down out of the transmission network, so you've got a distribution network to start off with close to your home. You then start to go further afield, so you then have a transmission network. By the way, this one's quite an interesting one. For those of you who are electrical engineers, I like pylons and I get very boring with them, and my wife hates me when I get boring with them. This is quite an interesting picture because here you can see 3 towers. So it's a good old AC system, 230 kilovolts. You can do that by counting the number of insulators are there. My wife gets very bored when I start counting insulators. Okay. This one's quite interesting because that's DC, and where's this picture taken? Just south of here. Okay, it's where the DC link comes over to. It comes over to Wellington. Okay, so it's at the just near the Cook Strait, just south of Wellington. And that eventually goes down the transmission grid, and so we're sitting over here. There's that DC line which we were talking about. There's the AC line. Excuse my pronunciation. How do I pronounce that? Mangahao. What's a Mangahao? Yeah, again, one of the very early power stations. That what it looks like. That was built in the 1920s. And this is kind of an interesting because it's not a run-of-river one, but actually you've got a dam right at the top here. You've got some pipes coming all the way through, and you've got a power station that sits there. And when you turn the light on, a little bit more water comes out of that power station. Okay? And that's how we produce the energy. Well, that's largely how we produce the energy in New Zealand. It's not quite right, which I have to keep on reminding people, is because actually water probably, a bit more water grows out of all the dams. It's not just in one place where it's reflected, it's actually distributed throughout the whole system. But for the purpose of this talk, I'll just say that one gets a little bit more water. So how do we do that worldwide? So this is an interesting picture. This is the total energy that's traded worldwide. The blue one, you can see, is hydro. The orange one is nuclear. That's renewables, that's coal, that's oil, and that's natural gas. So for me, the depressing point on this one is to see how much of that is actually fossil fuel driven. And we can see well over 2/3 of the energy is fossil fuel driven. However, there's some interesting stats this year. Okay, this is the first year where coal was larger than oil in terms of output. It's also the first year where over 20% of the total electricity generated in this world was done by renewables. Last year was also the first year where more capital was spent on renewables than on coal and oil put together. The world's changing. Okay? That little graph there is getting bigger and bigger. And what I wanted to do is to explore what some of those implications are going to be. Time for our first experiment. What I'm going to do is just explain the apparatus here so that we can see what's going to happen and you can kind of work out what's going to come through. Is what I have here is a simple light meter. Okay? And what I've got here is that's my sensor. Did everybody see what the sensor is? You'll need that in a little while. What I'm going to do is kind of just show and get this right. Right, if we now go to display and we can pick that up and we bring up the document feeder. Right, so we can see now that we are sitting at something like, when it settles down, something like 112 lux is what we're sitting in this room. Okay, it's going to go up to about 120 if I know correctly. What we're doing here is, where's the light coming from? It's coming from all the lights above us. Okay? And for me, this is a very simple model of what we mean by central provision. These are, I'm trying to give you an analog to say that's something like what the power stations are like. Centrally provided light, I control it. Okay, so I can go down and hopefully if I go to the right place here, I can say right, turn that down, and I can control that, and everybody's happy in the world. Okay, so that's an example of experiment number 1, which is central generalized system. And that's the way our energy network works at the moment. Let's go back to the slide that I had here. Remember the slide that I had? Okay, there's something unusual with the slide, which I've highlighted in the top left-hand corner there. Okay? What's that sitting over there? Any ideas? Right. Okay. So if you move the picture around a bit, we can see, okay, you can see it's the same picture I was just showing you there. Those are solar panels that are coming through. So let me ask the question again. Let's assume you're in that house. You see the rooms, the blinds are down. It's dark inside. You turn the light on. Now what happens? Talk to the person next to you. Right, so some of you who might have worked this out is that when you turn the light on, because of the impedances in the network, most of the energy will probably have come from that particular solar panel if it happened to be in the daytime. And so what we're starting to talk about, so what's interesting to me is that the energy is coming directly from the panels. There's no role in the distribution system. There's no role of the transmission system. There's no role of those generators. There's no role for the resellers. That person, for that moment in time, is becoming independent of all the power system that we have. And that's kind of a wake-up call. And for those in the know, we talk to them about a producer, so somebody who produces energy because they've got their solar panels. They're a consumer. They're consuming energy. And we kind of work them together and say they're a prosumer. So everybody says, so that the nice challenge about, the good thing about solar panels is that they're expensive. And so therefore you don't have a huge number of people actually buying solar panels, because that will really toss the challenge system. What's interesting is this is now a cost. Okay, how many of you heard of Moore's Law? Yeah, basically saying that you're doubling the capacity in transistors in computers every 18 months or so. Swanson's law basically says that you have a 20% decrease in the price of energy for every doubling of capacity. And you can see the green line is kind of saying that's what's happening. And you see in 1976, we were looking at about $100 a watt. Okay? And so that's where the price started, and you can see this is starting to travel down with a few bumps. Then we hit this area here around about 2001 to 2006. WTF. Okay? Germany kicks in and starts its feed-in tariffs. Suddenly what happens, it now becomes commercially viable for consumers to actually buy their own solar panels. The production capacity is pretty small, and it completely saturates the market. I happen to be sitting down in 2003 next to a guy who was the second largest solar panel producer in the US. He was saying he had to have guys with machine guns sitting in his trucks when they moved the panels around, because over the last 3 months they had 60% of their vehicles had been hijacked. That's how valuable solar panels were at that stage. That was it was in the US. Okay. So it's kind of interesting to say, so that price kept it steady for quite a while because the demand way exceeded what the supply was actually available. Feed-in tariffs started to tail off, and see what happens to the price again. We start to track that curve, and we're coming right down. And for me, what's interesting is that we're starting to see that the latest prices are sitting around about here, and actually they're hitting well below 50 cents per watt. Considering we are over $100 a watt not that long ago, it's interesting to see what that trajectory is. There's been quite a lot of speculation that a lot of this is just dumping from the Chinese, and actually that the real costs are way above that. I happen to speak to some of the suppliers, and I know that that curve can go a lot further down in terms of what their cost of production is. The only reason is they're sitting at that high level is because the same reason that we got it over there is that demand is far outstripping what they can actually supply. But their cost of production is way down here. So what's interesting is solar panels are starting to change. Little example of what happened in the UK. In 2011, the government in the UK, okay, so our dear friend Tony Blair made a kind of a mess up. He decided that as part of the talks and the treaties that he would commit UK to 20% reduction in the carbon usage. He would say that 20% of all energy in the UK by 2020 will be renewables. He made the mistake of thinking that energy was the same as electricity. When he came back, the guys at DEC, the Department for Energy and Climate Change, he said, there's no electrical here. This is energy. You've just signed us to commit to 20% reduction in energy in total. So at that point, they decided they needed to do something to meet those requirements. So what they decided to do was to bring in a feed-in tariff. And just to make sure that they weren't doing anything odd, they put a commission in to say, and then they committed a well-known company that works in this space to predict what are the scenarios in terms of take-up? So what you have on the vertical axis is thousands of megawatts. Okay, so each one of those, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 gigawatts of solar installed in the UK. And what they came back with and said, here's a low growth scenario, there's a high growth scenario. Just for fun, talk to the person, say, and ask what happens next. Go. That's what's happened. Between January and April this year, 3 gigawatts of solar was installed. Let me just say it again. Between January and April this year alone, 3,000 megawatts of solar was installed in the UK. Okay, what does that tell you about the speed of change? So what's really interesting is the laugh about in the UK. So what this is a map which says the irradiance, the horizontal irradiance, which says that what is the total amount of energy that you accumulate over a year if you've got a particular panel, and you can work it out because the great thing is that panels are stated at 1,000 watts per square meter in terms of solar. It basically says for every kilowatt of panel that you install, that's the total amount of kilowatts hours of energy that you'll accumulate over a year. If you look at the UK, it's kind of like this nice purpley blue color. And I happen to know that in Oxford, we got 150 kilowatts installed as a community project. We're getting about 990 kilowatt hours per annum. Have a look at New Zealand. If I, thanks to NIWA, I can actually get something better. This is actually what the radiance were. Okay, we've changed units. This is in gigajoules per annum. But just to give you an idea, that kind of dark green color, which is this lot here, remember I said the UK was 990. That's sitting around about 2,500 kilowatt hours. Almost 3 times the capacity that we have in New Zealand. This guy up here is well over 3 times the capacity that we have in the UK. So the interesting thing is you can now get yourself a solar panel installed, $3,000 New Zealand per kilowatt. Payback time, given a price of something like 25 cents, if that's what you're paying per kilowatt hour, your payback time is now just over 4 years. Okay, for solar PV. And that's without any special deals, that's without anything interesting. What's interesting is that one of the big challenges, though, is that your capital costs are still significant. Germany had a very interesting challenge, an option, and that is the banks realized they could make money out of this. And so what they've done is that you can now put your solar PV and a storage system onto your mortgage. And the take-up of solar in Germany has rocketed despite there being no feed-in tariffs. It's really kicked off. So is solar so great? Well, solar has some problems. I did some work in the Maldives for a number of years, about 3 years ago, and this gives you a typical load profile of what we had in the Maldives. But the shape of it, in wherever you go in the world, is about the same, except the nighttime load is probably a little bit lower, but not a lot lower. This is a typical load profile of what it looks like. So you can say time of day, amount of power that you use. Okay, so midday you've got a little peak there, big peak in the evenings, and some peak in the afternoon. When you start to say, okay, what happens if you put solar in the system and you design it for that midday peak, that's what you start to get. That's what the solar PV will give you. And some values that happen to work just kind of indicative is to say that in the Maldives, and remember the Maldives are in the equator, they're right in that sweet spot of what you want to do for solar, is that for that particular solar system, you needed something like 2,200 kilowatt hours in a day. The solar would only give you 780. The nighttime, you still needed you needed 1,400 kilowatt hours. What this kind of tells you is to say that solar is brilliant when the sun is shining. It's not particularly great when the sun isn't shining. Okay, so there's a challenge that's sitting there. So how do we manage that? So talk to the person next to you and say, how would you compensate for that? And there's two options. Go. Right, so the two options are, you can use the grid as backup, okay, which is what a lot of people are doing in New Zealand, or you can get yourself one of these. Okay, this is an example, it's one of the particular variations. This is the Tesla Powerwall. And what they're doing is that this is a, sorry, the graphic didn't come out really well, but that's, you can either get in as a 7 kilowatt pack or a 10 kilowatt pack. And that's basically a 10 kilowatt hour pack of batteries that are sitting in there. So the 10 kilowatt hour pack is sitting at $3,500. The 7 kilowatt pack is sitting at $3,000. Those are both US. They're guaranteed to do a deep cycle every day for 10 years. They're guaranteed. If you don't do it, they will swap it out at zero cost. Okay, so that kind of tells you where batteries are moving. So what does that, if we got one of those and we took them into New Zealand, what would that mean? It meant that every time you pumped energy into and out of that pack, and you include the round-trip losses, because it's only about 95% efficient, what you find is that it's going to cost you about 10 cents a kilowatt hour. That's 10 cents New Zealand a kilowatt hour. Couple that with the cost of solar PV at about 14 cents a kilowatt hour, you can now do yourself an off-grid system for 25 cents a kilowatt hour. No standing charges. How much do you pay for electricity?
44 cents in Hong Kong.
That's interesting, isn't it? Right, so the basic idea is you take your PV, you run it through here, through the Tesla, you've got your inverter for your PV system already, so you can do that. Just to see how big a bet Tesla is putting on this, they're starting to create the Gigafactory. That's what it looks like. That's a scale, that's an artist's impression. To give you a sense of scale, that's a 6 megawatt wind turbine. Okay? It's coming on stream in 2017. 2 years' time, it's going to be producing battery capacity of 35 gigawatt hours. 35 gigawatt hours. New Zealand's annual capacity, I could work out what they consume per annum, is about 37 gigawatt hours. This one factory on its own will produce enough batteries to store New Zealand's complete energy requirements for a year. Okay, and it's producing that every year. Okay. What's kind of scary is this is probably number 3 in the size of battery plants that are coming up on stream. Battery prices are dropping like mad. When I started working this in about 3 years ago, about 2011, we were looking at about $1,000 a kilowatt hour. What we're starting to see is that actually, and you can see this is what the literature was all saying. The blue dots is what the academic literature was all claiming what was happening. Meanwhile, this is what the producers were actually doing. You can see here that that's Nissan and that's Tesla. Sorry, the solid dots is Nissan and the hollow dots are Tesla. And what you're seeing is actually real-world battery costs were dropping dramatically. I'm just putting in 2 extra dots there. That is a value that I know one of the OEMs was getting earlier on this year in terms of, car manufacturers in the UK were paying around about $250 a kilowatt hour. If you look at that Tesla Powerwall, and you look at the difference between the 7 kilowatt version at $3,000 and the 10 kilowatt version at $3,500, what's your marginal cost of your batteries? $500 for 3 kilowatts, $166. That's a game changer. Interesting fact is when you get down to this line, about $150, that will make the price of an EV, capital cost of an EV, equivalent to that of a conventional vehicle. So that means that the cost of an electric vehicle will be the same price as a conventional vehicle. We reckon by 2022 to 2025, somewhere around there, you'll have half of all new vehicles sold in the world, and there's 70 million new vehicles created every year in the world. 35 million vehicles in the world will be EVs. Okay? Couple that with the home energy storage, what you're talking about, is we're going to start seeing a new breed of person. Somebody who produces, who stores, and consumes. And if anybody can do a better word than that, that'd be great. So I'm calling them prosumers, because they're storing as well. This is kind of challenging. Talk to the person next to you and say, what do you think the implications are for the grid? Go. Right, so over the last 6 months or so, this is a problem that's been kind of bothering me. And I've been talking to a number of people, and we're starting to explore some scenarios. And basically, we think that there are, just at a very crude level, there are 2 key scenarios. In fact, it's a little bit more complicated because you've also got to take account of whether you can do long-distance transmission line, which changes the game, and also whether you can do interseasonal storage, which is another challenge where you can change the game. But let's just consider what happens if you suddenly get a large rise of prosumers in the market. One variant is everybody goes off grid. And that variant is exactly what as I said earlier on, is what we're starting to see in places like Germany. The UK is also starting to see the first signs of that. The second option that we have is we start to create a cooperative grid. What I wanted to do is, the first one is a kind of obvious answer. This one's not so obvious. I wanted to explore this one a little bit more and to how we do that. Just as a quick one, off-grid I think is going to be a really bad outcome. And the reason for that is because you lose resilience in the system. And I think that's a real killer. But the problem is if we do things as business as usual, that's the outcome we're going to walk ourselves into. And so we need to start thinking about saying, how do we not go down that route? And what are other viable routes so that we can start to think about how we do those? And that's exactly the type of thing that we're starting to do in the UK. But we're also talking to people like in South Korea and the US and Germany and elsewhere, because this is starting to become a real issue. Right, that's almost the end of the PowerPoint. Now we're going to have some fun, because what I want to try and explore some of the challenges around that. So, torches at the ready. Okay, so let's give ourselves a reference point, and I'm not sure this is going to work because they're not the torches that I was hoping for, but let's give us a quick example. Okay, so we are getting to something round about, why is this going so slow? That should be going fast. We're sitting right about 95, 96, 97, 100. Okay, so let's kind of see, right, where's my sensor? It's over there. Okay, so I'm going to turn the main lights down. Okay, as fast as you can, I want to try and get that to 75. Shine your torches on there and get it to 75, but no more. No more. Okay, right, we're getting not bad. Okay, not bad. Okay. But what you can see is just turn them down. Okay. What we can see that what happens is that if you do it again, just go really fast and go for it and go as fast as you can. Notice what happens. We overshoot and we come down again and we overshoot and we come down again and we have a little bit of chaos sitting there. Okay. So what I want to now do is to say, okay, this is not the first time we've had this type of challenge. This is not the first technology system where we have tried to drive a whole lot of power through our little sensor. Okay, and this is where my title comes in. Talk to the person next to you, and let's say you've got an email with a large attachment sitting on it. You click the send button. What happens behind the scenes? Go. Okay, so the problem that we have is that when 500 people try and send email all at the same time, we get congestion. And in the 80s, there's a big lot of research effort was done on to say, how do we overcome congestion in the networks? And what was realized is what you needed to do was you needed to sense whether there was congestion on the network and then respond appropriately. And so what they do is they'll send a packet off. So a packet is a set of data, normally something like 256 bytes long. They'll send it down the network. They'll see if there's an acknowledgement comes through. So send it off, wait till it comes back. If there's an acknowledgement comes back, it says, okay, that was good. And if it comes back really quickly, it says, okay, I'll go through really quickly. It's open. I'll double the size of the packet. So it's 512 bytes. In electrical terms, it's basically doubling the power because the rate of change, or the rate that you're sending it, is increasing. So what it'll do is it will then send that through and wait for it to come back. If that gets through, it then goes up to 1024 bytes and eventually up to about 2. It pans out at about 64 kilobytes at a shot. If you send something through and it doesn't come back, it then ramps down and says, okay, let's see what we can do about that. So what it does is it's managing the stresses in the system. And this brave new world, we are going to have to manage the stresses in the system. The challenge we have, we've got to do it in real time. And that's really difficult. So this is some of the work that we're looking at, is to say, okay, here we're sitting at the end of our little place here. In the actions that we're doing, can we start to actually look at saying, can we control the system? And the challenge that we have is that we're measuring there at the point of, I call it measure point of common coupling. It's basically where your meter is. And basically what you want to try and do is to say, can we identify the high voltage or the system-wide stresses? Can we identify that stuff that's happening in the local level? And can we also identify what's happening in the medium voltage or the city level? So can we say from here, can we identify what's going up there, there, and there? Okay, so let's start off with the easy one. How do we measure level? How do we measure what's happening at this level? Those of you electrical engineers, shout out. Frequency. Yeah, that's the one. So what you want to do is we want to measure frequency. So this is some measurements of frequency in the UK. This is done from our office a while back. You see 50 hertz is what it should be. So we should be tracking that. And for a particular time period, that's what the frequency was doing. When it's over frequency, it means that there's more than enough generation capacity in the system. If it's under frequency, it means that there's not as much capacity in the system that we can do. We can start to respond to that. And so we've got that. The second one is to say, what about looking at the local feeder? And what we can do is we can start to look at voltage, and we can say, okay, at the local feeder, the higher the voltage is, the higher the I times Z is. So the Z is the impedance of the feeder, so the more current you're drawing, the higher the volt drop in your system is. So by looking at your local voltage, that's what you start to see. Kind of interesting, isn't it? Because look at the variation that you have there. It goes from about just under 247 down to about 240 volts. This happened to be measured in my office in Christchurch. When I saw that, I said, there's a problem here. Talk to the person next to you and say, why do you think there's a problem? Right, so the problem was, when I'm expecting to see a high load during the day, I'm expecting that voltage to really come down, and it's not. What's going on? Well, those of you guys in the lines business will know that in the system, you have these guys sitting here, these are your transformers, which go from your various voltages. The UK happens to go 132, 33, 33, 11. And those transformers there don't have a fixed ratio of the voltage on either side. They can change the ratio as you're going along. Okay, and they're called online tap changers. And basically what these tap changers do is says that when it detects there's a large amount of current in the system, it says, okay guys, I know the end voltage is going to be quite low. I need to step it up a bit so that you can create a higher voltage over here so that by the time you get your losses done there, I don't see much of a difference. So we said, okay, the challenge we need to do is to find out what's going on with those tap changers. And so what we said is that if you look, if you ignore what's happening with the tap changers, we see there's about 11 volt difference between the two. When you detect those tap changing events and you unravel it, this is now the profile that you're starting to see. So what we've done is online, at my plug socket, I have detected when upstream in the medium voltage network a tap changer has occurred. I've then said, okay, this is how much it's changed the voltage by. I need to now compensate my voltage, and now you see exactly the same voltage curve, but now that we've identified the tap changer, we can start to see what that voltage is starting to look like. Remember, we had 11 volts to start off with. We now got 19 volts. Also, remember I said, what was the problem that I had earlier on? During the day, I wasn't seeing a voltage drop. During the day, I'm now seeing a voltage drop. So what this means now is that we can start to identify exactly what's going on the load, but also, kind of by surprise, by tracking those tap changes, we can see what's going in the medium voltage network. So what we can start to say is that we know that those tap changes are responding to what's happening in the city at the medium voltage level. If we can identify which tap they're in, we can start to identify when that particular system is stressed. So when you put them all together, this is frequency, this is at the city level, and this is at the local level. We can start to see when the stresses in the system are occurring without any real-time communication. That's the key. Just by looking at the voltage, we can detect what's happening at those three levels, which now means we've got an opportunity to do some real-time control and start to play with actually what's happening. Let's see how that plays out. Right. Experiment number 3. Torches at the ready. Now you need your card. Okay, where are my jokers? Right. The jokers on the front, your objective is to mess things up as much as you can. Okay, so you're gonna try and mess this up as much as you can. Okay? The rest of you, if you've got a number, before you change your action, count in your mind, go 1. So I've got number 5. I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, now change. If you've got a face card, in other words, a Jack, King, or Queen, you can respond as quick as you like. Okay? Right, now let's see if we can get to 75 again. Go. Okay, we're doing quite well there. Okay. What we can see here is that the jokers are trying to mess us around, but because we're doing a delay in the response that we're doing, we're actually getting a much more stable system. Okay? So what you're trying to do here is by saying that by doing some real-time control, what we're doing is we're actually responding to the stress in the system and we're trying to adjust it, despite our jokers trying to mess it up. Okay, and that is what we call a decentralized control. And notice, did I tell you guys what to do? No. You did it on your own because you followed a simple rule which allowed you to do it, despite what's happening with the jokers. Right, now for the penultimate experiment. What I want you to do is work in a group of 3 or 4 people, sit next to each other. Jokers are now no longer jokers. Okay, they're going to sit next to each other, work in groups of 3 or 4. And what you need to do is that about half of you need to try and control this, and we'll make it a bit easier, we'll say about 60. While the other half of you are using your light to count how many triangles we got on the card. So turn the back of the card. So some of you are going to be using your thing to try and do that, and the other half are trying to do that, and you need to swap around. So what I'm going to do before we get going, okay, so half of the group, or 3 or 4 of you, are going to be controlling the system. The other half are going to be shining your light on there to try and count how many there are. But what I want you to do is talk to each other and say what strategy you're going to use. So what strategy you use a group of 3 or 4 are going to use to try and ensure that we maintain this at 60 while somebody's counting the numbers. And don't start counting the numbers now in the free time. Okay, go. Talk to each other and then I'll tell you when you're ready to go. Okay, because I've turned the lights down, I'm going to say the target is to keep it at, say, 25. Okay, and you're going to try and count the number of squares. On your marks, get set, go. Okay, 23, 24, 30, too high. We've got to go down. I'm going to try and keep it at 25 and still count the squares. Okay, now the next person's got to start counting squares. Right, the next person's got to start counting squares. Right, have you worked out how many squares we've got? Shout out.
12 times 15.
Right, 12 times 15. Great. Okay. What I've tried to show you there is what you've started to do is peer-to-peer trading. What you've done is you set up a negotiation about who's going to be shining the light on the centrally and who's going to be using the light locally. And because you had to change, your needs were changing because certain people you had to swap over who's going to be looking at their particular task, what you had to do was sit aside amongst yourselves and decide whether it's going to work or not. And to me, this is kind of going to be the key paradigm of what the future grid's going to look like if we're going to ensure we're not all going to go off grid. Because what's going to have to happen is that we're all going to have to negotiate with each other to say, when can we put system power into the system? When are we going to be storing in the system? And when are we going to be using from the system? Now, this is not going to be straightforward because there's one thing I've learned about consumers. Actually, two things, but it's kind of one wrapped together. First of all, they want to be in control. Secondly, they're lazy. Right? So what you're going to have to set up is a system where we can set up parameters that we don't have to do so often, and more importantly, the default parameters do the right sort of thing, which users can then start to interact with, but that underneath the hood, real-time control, looking at the stresses in the system, are actually starting to do those types of jobs. That's exactly how the internet works. We decide when we want to send a particular email or something through. We make the decision, but under the hood, the system decides when the packets go through and when it's too stressed and it winds down on that. You might also know that, for instance, under various systems, they might say, okay, video gets preference over email, so you can start to look to say, how do we get various services can be prioritized over others. When you start to take these ideas and to say, okay, how does that apply to the electrical market, this starts to get quite interesting. So what I'm going to give you is about 3 minutes or 2 minutes, I'm going to give you 2 minutes because we're running out of time, is to say, taking these ideas of decentralized control and peer-to-peer type of trading, which you've experienced, what do you think a new system might look like? Go. Right, let's take this forward. Okay, so you guys are starting to have some good ideas. Let me say some of the thoughts that I had and to see where I'm going, and maybe we can have a discussion a bit more in the future. So what's the new approach going to look like? So I think a given is that each house will either be one or two or three of these, a consumer, a storer, or a producer. That's a given. There's nothing that we can do that's going to stop us from going there. The economics are driving us in that direction. We're stuffed if you think that you're going to go elsewhere. However, we can either go down the individual, off-grid, everybody's an island type approach, or we can start to look at something that's a little more collaborative, but also reflects the capital and infrastructure that's required in order to support it. And the problem that we have at the moment with energy is that our energy markets were developed in the 50s and 60s, okay, and they kind of went through a little bit of revitalization or whatever you want to call it in the 80s and 90s. But basically, the idea was that you traded energy. Regardless of what else is happening in the system, the primary market was trading energy. At the moment, where we're standing now, the marginal cost of energy is going to be zero. So what the hell are we trading? Power, capacity. That's what we're going to be. That's going to be the bottom line. And also, it's going to be trading the capacity in the network and in the generators. And it's also going to be trading uncertainty. Because we're all going to be wanting to use things at different times. And that uncertainty means we need to be able to pay for that opportunity. So the new approach says to me, one variation of skinning this cat is to say each street now becomes a market to share a resource. Why do I say each street? Because in the electrical infrastructure underneath that, that represents normally a feeder. I don't know how your markets are set, but that's a feeder. And that's a unit of resource that the lines company have to put in. And so what you're saying is if I'm trading with my neighbor, I am now using that resource of the lines company, but just that feeder, and I've got to make a contribution to that. So that means that my distribution costs should be low. But the problem is that if I'm turning things on and off, and my neighbor's turning things on and off, the uncertainty of when things are going to happen is extremely high. So the uncertainty is high, so I should be paying a higher price for that uncertainty to enable me to have those services as I want to use them. And my responsibility is to manage the stresses in that local network, okay, in that particular level. The next level up is each street trades with the next street. Okay, so we now have a market that's one level up, which says that now the distribution costs increase because we now might have to go through a transformer. We're going to pay for that. But the uncertainty decreases. Because when you start to aggregate 10 homes or 50 homes or 100 homes, the variation becomes a lot less because of the diversity that happens in the system. And now my responsibility is to say I've got to manage those stresses in that medium voltage network or maybe at the transformer or medium voltage network. To go up a level, we now got each city or area is starting to work with each other. Now we not only have distribution costs, but we also have transmission costs that kind of kick in. But uncertainty is now way down, and at this level we can start to manage stresses at the national level. But we know damn well that there's not enough renewable capacity to actually meet those requirements. So we need to have a generator of last resort. So these are the guys which are the conventional generators, and they're going to be providing that generation capacity to ensure that they are providing, they're filling in the system. But to me, they provide a much more important role as well. Yes, the transmission costs are higher. Remember, we saw how far we had to transmit stuff through. But because they're a large company, their capital costs are significantly lower than what the man in the street can get. So therefore, they can provide a ceiling on what costs are going to be at all levels. And so therefore, you can start to manage the spikes in the system in terms of costs. What are the implications for this? Well, remember I started in sustainability. People, planet, and profits. So let's explore it under each one of those. People. I don't know about in New Zealand, well I do, but in the UK, the energy companies are one of the most hated groups in society. Yeah? We're now starting to get to say, actually, each one of us is one of those generators. And instead of being a place where people start to feel exploited, it's actually a place that we can collaborate and act as a cooperative. So my instinct is to say, if we play this right, we can actually build up on the well-being of people because they'll feel they're actually part of this marketplace and start to do things. A really interesting thing talking to guys from South Korea, they said actually one of the useful aspects of this marketplace is that you can play to people's philanthropic aspects as well. to say that, okay, if you've got excess capacity, you might want to give that excess capacity to your local school, your local hospital, your local charity. Really interesting idea around energy. We never think about it that way. But you can start to pull in and start to improve that human capital in the use of energy. Planet. We're starting to use a resource, okay, not so important in New Zealand, I know, but it sure is in our country, where we can start to use renewable resources in a cost-effective way that is accessible to most people, and we can see that we can make a significant change. Remember I said that when the market conditions are right, remember that 3 gigawatts being installed in the space of 3 months. When you've got those type of open markets, you can make those really big, rapid changes, which means that we actually do have an opportunity to save the planet, unlike what Elon Musk thinks. We can make that difference. What about profit and prosperity? Well, for me, the option of going down the individual, going off-grid, means that a whole lot of generation and transmission and distribution assets become stranded. And the financial impact of that on all our pension funds and the like are going to be quite severe. So what this approach does, it still allows for a prosperous energy system to evolve and develop. But to me, what's more important, it's giving the right sorts of signals to address where capital needs to be spent in the right parts of the system, and to allow those people to prosper and to do well. But it does need a slightly different way of thinking. Have we solved the problem? Heck no. There's still a long way to go from where we are now. But at least I think, for the first time since I started working in this area in 2003, I'm starting to see light at the end of the tunnel, where a new system could actually start to evolve and come forward, which will mean that we no longer have floods every so often, and we can still keep the lights going on in New Zealand. Thank you very much.
Agreed to take a few questions, and once he's finished, provided the caterers have turned up, we'd like to invite you to hang around for a little while, have a drink and a snack, and then you can all talk to each other and work out the finer details. Malcolm's accepting applications for PhDs for next year now, and I'm sure if you fail to make the grade, then someone else might jump for you too. Right, who would like to ask a question? Becky, could I ask you if you could take that? You have to hold the microphone virtually in your mouth. Molly, introduce yourself, where you come from, and then ask your question.
Yes, Molly Mellish, live across the harbour in York Bay, come from Boston, Massachusetts, 53 or 4 years ago. And we're a room really full of electricity specialists. I am one of the rare representatives of a more general energy specialty. Everything you've talked about today is focused on day-to-day variations, possibly up to through the week to the weekend, and typically right down to frequency management. Electrical availability in this country varies over some different time scales. The very interesting seasonal, which is quite predictable, far more interesting.
Molly, the question, not a lecture.
Yes, far more interesting is dry years and wet years. How, my friend, are you planning to use, say, peer-to-peer communication to deal with the longer-term variations in electricity supply?
There's a short answer and a long answer. The short one is you're talking about interseasonal storage. That's very well interseasonal. So normally so what I mean by interseasonal is anything on the timescale from 6 months to 6 years or 7 years. That is an extremely challenging problem and something that we're going to have to deal with. The problem that we have with interseasonal storage is that the amount of energy you put through and out again is fairly large, but you only put it through once every so often. So the cost of that is extremely high. But you have to be careful about it, because what you need to do is you need to come to a technology, and flip it around, is you need to have a technology which is extremely low cost in terms of storing that. Because you can't take a normal battery pack. Remember, I've talked about the $150 a week. No, but hold on. This is the key difference. Your battery pack is $150 now, roughly per kilowatt hour, but I'm using it every day. Okay, so I can multiply it by the number of days, and so therefore my cost comes right down. Interseasonal storage, you can't do that, and therefore it's becoming extremely difficult.
In other words, batteries no answer. What is?
That's $1 million question. So some of the thoughts that are coming through is compressed gas, looking at gas to liquids, electricity to gas, electricity to liquids, hydrogen, methane production. All of those types of ideas allow you to do multi-year storage at a cost which is reasonable in terms of storing the stuff, but they're not very good in terms of the round-trip efficiency.
They're all electricians. Think about energy, not electricity.
Right, good conversation. Anyone else got a question? Slight catering issues outside. Right up at the back, Nico. Explain who you are.
Hi, Nicolas Vessio from Parco. Just a question. This peer-to-peer network, in your opinion, do you see it being developed part of regulatory push or more by companies themselves?
That is a very open question. My instinct is to say that you'll start to see players in the market early on, because I know that, for instance, in the UK, I know of about 20 communities that want to do this already. I know of communities in New Zealand who want to do this already. There's a real aspiration to want to be able to do this. When there's that pent-up need, it means there's a customer value to be had, which means there's an entrepreneur that will come along and actually solve the problem. My kind of worry is to say that if you're not very careful, we can quickly go down rabbit holes which are going to cause a lot of problems to the overall industry. And my suggestion is, and this is what we're starting to work in the UK with, is to start to have a conversation amongst all the potential players in this field to say, okay guys, what is the right way forward? How can we get to a place that's going to be amicable for everybody, and there's going to be a value for everybody? So my long-term thought is to say we need to get people like this Market Forum need to be sitting around, bringing those players in, talking about what are we going to do. The whole industry moves together with government and regulatory environments to work with it. That's the good option. The bad option is we become a Wild West and people just start doing stuff. It's what happened with Uber. Look what Uber did to the transport industry.
No pressure there then. Right. Any more questions over on the far side?
Hi, Juliet Clendon from the Electricity Engineers Association. So in terms of capital, we've got, instead of generators putting a lot of capital into their generation, we've got individual households putting capital into their solar panels. So we're seeing those who have disposable income, who can get the loan to finance the solar panels, are going to be able to enter this market and participate in the market.
Yeah.
But how about the have-nots in society who won't be able to afford this capital, who then lose out? So instead of being exploited by a power company per se, they can't participate in the new market and they're just being exploited by their neighbour instead. So you see in New Zealand, everyone says we'll have solar panels, but think how much of the housing stock in New Zealand isn't insulated. So if people had this kind of capital, they'd spend it on insulation first, and this is the first time in my adult life I've lived in an insulated house. So it's a big question there, do people have the capital to enter the market?
Okay, so can I give you the cynical answer first, and then I'll give you the slightly better answer longer on. How many of those guys that you're talking about, those people that you're talking about, are on prepayment meters? A large proportion of those. Prepayment is much more expensive. They're high risk, so therefore they pay a higher premium in the system. That's kind of like the way it is at the moment. In the new world that we're looking at is to say, I think what you could start to see is a much more collaborative idea where people would start to say, for instance, give up or start to play into their philanthropic side to things to say, okay, a certain percentage of my energy I can now give to the energy poor in the world, or to certain charities, or you can work that route through. At the moment, there's no mechanism at all to be able to do that. In the future, when there's a possible mechanism, the question is, and this is why I had the jokers in the field, is that you're always going to have people who are going to try and play the system. It's a balance we're going to have, and it's something we're going to work through. I don't think there's a silver bullet to answer that question at the moment. What I am trying to do is to say, at least trying to say, if you can put bands to say the prices may not go above or below a certain value, at least they're still somewhat protected.
Can I add to that answer?
Yeah, please.
One of the things which is happening at the moment is
Do you want to wait for the mic, then we can all hear?
one of the things that is happening at the moment in the communities is that some of the haves who can afford PV don't actually have a north-facing roof or have trees in the way to stop it from being effective. So what they're doing is that they're going to the less advantaged people who've got plenty of roof space pointing the right way, and they're saying, will you rent me some of the roof space and I'll give you some of the power. And this is happening in communities already.
Yeah. You see, what's happening is that you're enabling that kind of trading to go on, and that philanthropic aspect, which you can't do in the existing system. Right, one last question. Going. Yeah.
Fraser Clark from the Electricity Authority. Just a question about that last resort role for larger generators. Just thinking of the generation mix here, geothermal doesn't like to be last resort, likes to run flat. Low-cost wind generation affected by the weather conditions. Hydro also with some limitations. How do you reconcile those costs? It might be lower cost than the domestic solar. How do you end up with a situation, how do you reflect that desire for sustainability and using those lower cost resources when you might be crowding them out with those other decisions?
Okay, so if I deal with, okay, so let's start with something like the thermal plant, which is kind of the first kicker in the system. The problem with the thermal plant is that you don't have you don't have a zero marginal cost of production. Most of the other ones you do. So that kind of means is that you can start to set yourself a ceiling on what's happening. I think in the brave new world, you're not going to be selling energy. You're going to be selling power and capacity. And a lot of those big guys will be able to do that, because I can see places like, large swathes of Auckland actually not having enough space to actually provide all the generating capacity they need. They're going to have all those big suppliers in order to supply it. If I look at something like London, that's just as bad. Even though you've got a huge in the southeast and the south of London, where you've got larger swathes of land that's available for this place, it's just not nearly enough for those large consumer needs. It's going to be a challenge. But the option is to say, what's the alternative? Everybody goes off grid. There's no role for them to play at all. They're right royally stuffed.
And there's a lot more work to do. So one of the things I've learned about this industry, I think Malcolm rather sort of dismissed my entire working career, which is the introduction of competition to the electricity industry over the last 25 years, as a minor blip in the recent. But one of the things I have a very strong view about is that when we've been through this process, what we've generally done is start with very large customers, develop very manual processes, and then scale them down for the mass market to the point at which they don't work. New Zealand is world famous because when we introduced low-cost customer switching, it actually took Ron about 2 and a bit years to clear up the mess that was involved in not having automated processes to deal with that, because we used exactly the same processes that we'd done for large power customers, which of course work fine when you've got about 20 of them and don't work quite so well when you've got 4.5 million. And in all the debates about this new world of the Internet of Energy, everybody tells me that the analogy is that you take a transmission system operator and you just give them responsibility for every single endpoint on the network. And of course that doesn't work because it has people in it. And this is the first time I've ever heard anyone start to explain the type of self-limiting mechanisms which it will be necessary to deploy if you're actually going to balance the system when you have active users at the periphery of the system, not to say we have all the answers, but it gives us a little glimmer. And it's very interesting, the technical work that Malcolm's been through, this remote sensing of tap changing events that would allow autonomous elements in a network to be able to respond to the condition of the network and help bring things back into balance, actually provides a line of sight to something that we now need to work out how to implement as an industry. So it's been very, very exciting. But wait, there's more. We've got another overseas visitor coming early next month, Transpower. Actually giving you quite a lot of love here, John. That's quite good. Look after your clients. That's what I've always said. Transpower have a visiting American academic called Feridun Siushani, and he follows international smart grid developments around the world. He's a sort of magpie consultant who sort of picks up interesting things. So he's going to be here for a week at the beginning of November, and he's agreed to do another public lecture like this, where I've asked him to focus on what the evolving operating models for this heavily disrupted environment will be. So I hope to put the invites up on Eventbrite for that on Monday next week, so hopefully all of you will jump in. Seats will be selling like hotcakes. Please join me in thanking him very much.